couple more folks to trickle in. Give it till like 3:04, and then we'll go ahead and start. All right, looks like we have a quorum, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining today. This is our CETA Performance and Compliance Advisory Group meeting number 4. This is our final meeting for the year for this advisory group. And for our agenda today, we'll review the revised reporting template and we'll discuss feedback. So during the last meeting, we reviewed the draft reporting template for the CETA Interim Performance and Compliance Report. And I made some adjustments, and I'll gather your feedback and make any last changes. And we'll also have a thank you and a farewell at the end, a little surprise to thank you for the time you've dedicated to this advisory group. But before we dive into things, I always like to start with introductions. I'll go ahead and start. My name is Aaron. I go by he, him pronouns. I work for the Department of Commerce. And what's your favorite summer activity? That's a hard one for me because I love summer, especially in Washington State. But one thing that's super cool is bioluminescent kayaking is a thing that you can do in Washington State that I didn't know about. I've done it in Bellingham. I've done it in the Olympia area along the bottom of the Puget Sound there. And Austin will be a little busy today, so I'm not sure if he'll introduce himself. He's got some other meetings, so I'll popcorn to Nicole.
Hi everyone, Nicole Hughes, she, her, here on behalf of the Public Generating Pool. My favorite summer activity, I'm a fair weather camper, so summer is like pretty much prime time for camping. So looking forward to taking a trip in July of this year and unplugging a little bit. All right, I'm just gonna go to Gracia next.
Hi everyone. Camera's not super working well today, but pronouns are she, hers. Name is Gracia Lemes, Seattle City Light. Favorite summer activity, honestly, just the sun. I don't know how to explain it. Like, I just like to be outside and just absorb as much sunlight as I possibly can. Anything that gets me outside and in direct sunlight is my favorite, or just my favorite activities. I'm down for almost everything. And I will pass it to Almost.
Oh gee, I think is my camera not working even? Huh. And it looks like
your mic is working, but I don't think your camera is.
Okay, I couldn't tell if you okay. So I was gonna tell Gracia that her audio was also not good, but you know what? I can't talk because my video is just not working. So this is gonna sound really weird. My name's Almaz Nigesh, and I work for Tacoma Power. And like, I kid you not, my favorite summer activity is just walking around the house and saying, "Thank you, God, for air conditioning." Like that, because I went my first 15 years living in Washington State without an air conditioner. And once the heat gets past 70 degrees, I start complaining. 75 is when I start complaining. So yeah, I'm like, yes, I am so grateful for my air conditioning. And summer is I'm never more grateful than in the summer. So I'm going to pass this on to Amanda.
Hi there, Amanda Gehring, Vista Utilities. And I would say my favorite summer activity would be also being out in the sun. I have a garden usually, so I like to be out in the garden and a little creek that runs through my property. So we like to sit down and put our feet in the water. And I will pass it to Molly.
Hello, Molly Morgan, she, her pronouns, with the Washington UTC. And my favorite summer activity is gotta be sailing. Yeah, I like to go out probably most weekends whenever I can get out there, and just love being on the water and on the sound. I'll pass it to Brian.
Okay. Y'all, okay. No way. All right, I don't know what happened. I'm Brian from PSC. My AT him pronouns. My favorite summer activity is eating popsicles with my kids on our porch. I thought my video was gonna work, but it didn't. I'll popcorn to Kimberly.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Alejandro. I work for Pacific Core Pacific Power. I use she, her pronouns. My favorite summer activity would probably be spending time at Mount Rainier. It's my favorite mountain, and I do prefer colder climates in the summer. And let me kick it to, has Catherine gone?
I have not gone, so I can go ahead and go. Apologize. My camera is also not behaving with Zoom today. Catherine Patton, she, her, from Bonneville Power Administration. My favorite summer activities are anything on the water. I grew up in the Florida Keys, where every day is summertime. So lots of swimming, diving, snorkeling, sailing, anything I could do here. This ocean in the Pacific Northwest is a little more angry than the Atlantic, but I do try to make the best of it, especially when it's warm. And I will go to Charlie.
Hi, everyone. It's crazy how many cameras are not working today. I wonder if Zoom had like a weird update or something. My name is Charlie, she, her pronouns. I'm a policy associate with the Northwest Energy Coalition, and probably similar to Catherine, anything on the water. But I was going to say, particularly, I love swimming. And I got to yesterday in Lake Sammamish because it was warm enough. And the lake was cold, but it felt nice to be like just floating and in water. And I will pass to, who else has not gone? Jean Marie.
Thanks, Charlie. Jean Marie Dreyer, she, her pronouns, PCU, Public Counsel Unit of the Attorney General's Office. And like many, I am also a fan of water, drinking it, swimming in it, sailing or kayaking on it. We are fortunate enough to have a pool where my husband and son and I live, so sometimes I can take a dip in that. But my absolute favorite is similar to Charlie. I like natural bodies of water as well. So friend of mine lives kind of by a lake in the Bremerton area, and sometimes we go out to their cabin, and there's just nothing like being in a lake. So paddling around or floating peacefully, as Charlie mentioned. So let's see.
I think that's it.
I think I was last. Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you all for sharing. It sounds like we all love some sun in the Pacific Northwest, which we don't get often, but we don't like the heat. So whether that be water or AC, we find some ways to escape the heat. So I'll go ahead and share the revised reporting template. I'm gonna shift over to that. All right, are you guys able to see the document?
Yep.
Yep.
Zoom in though.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll just walk through the changes that were made, and we can kind of discuss each tab as we go. This is the background slide. We didn't make any changes here. Leave the contact information stayed the same. We had some discussion on targets here, and I made a clarification note that this is the utility's 4-year weighted average over the 4-year period. And we had some discussion about this, and looking at the language of the rule more closely, it seems that the intention is over the 4-year period and not necessarily the like the latest uh clean energy kind of percentage. And Charlie shared a resource about PSE trying to change it over at the UTC, but in this case, the rule language here seems to indicate that it's a 4-year weighted average, and we talked about some good reasons why it should be that way because of hydro availability. And then the other clarification note I made here is on demand response. There was questions about whether it was the demand response capacity acquired rather than utilized. And in this case, this is acquired. So that's the clarification note. Whether it's used or not, it's the capacity acquired. Do folks have any feedback on the notes here? Is there anything I could add to make it more clear? Nicole, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I am just wondering, with respect to the variation from target explanation boxes, if you are only interested in gathering information when your actuals are less than your target, or like in the example you plugged in here, you have 10% more energy than targeted. So is Commerce also interested in hearing explanations of that positive variance as well, or just the negative variance?
That oh, so you're asking whether, like, if they went over, if an explanation should be given?
Yeah, so like you put in this example, your renewable target was 40%, your actuals were 50%, you have a excess of 10% relative to target. Does the utility need to explain that, extra credit, or only in the case where they are negative relative to the target?
I don't think that the rule language says only if you're short. I think that's like the general intention, but it might be good to, I'll see if I can pull up the rule language and just look at it really quick. I think it just says variation from target. Yeah. It doesn't say any directionality. So yeah, so I think you would explain it if you're over. Maybe you could explain that it's just because of more hydro availability. But if it's due to maybe a utility decided to procure electricity from a generation plant, and it was able to produce more electricity than anticipated, that could be good to know. And then I think the intention for this is if they're falling quite short, it seemed kind of self-explanatory to me, but do you think I should add add a note to clarify these?
Yeah, and I'll plug it in the chat, but I actually think the rule language does say for any measurement of achievement reported under the subsections A through
Oh,
E,
that's less.
that is less. So I think it is interested in when the variation is
Okay.
less
Okay.
than targeted.
Thanks for catching that on
Yeah.
the fly there. I just took a quick glance, but yeah, so I will clarify that. So maybe we can say variation. Maybe we should just put it up here. Say uh utility only needs to explain variation from target if if actuals are less expected. And I'll say the orange. Okay, how is that?
Looks good to me.
Okay. Thanks for catching that. Right. Yeah, it looks like it applies to all of the sections: demand response, renewables, non-emitting, conservation efficiency. Yeah, so it would apply to all the orange columns here. Okay. Any other comments or thoughts on this page?
I had a question on the demand response. Can you show that note one more time?
Yeah.
Acquired rather than utilize. And I believe this is part of the conversation last time. Acquired just meaning megawatts that we think customers have enrolled in. Rather, the megawatts we think we're going to get based on the customers that have enrolled. It's more of a, is this a pre-event or post-event number?
So this is the so even though this report is reporting like actuals, this is kind of demand response capacity acquired. So even though it's backward looking, it's kind of how much demand response did you have available at any moment that you've acquired. So you might have enrolled a lot of customers. Maybe you didn't need to use all the potential demand response capacity that you had through the customers that you enrolled. And so you would report that number in megawatts. But you wouldn't report, let's say you only used like 10% of that demand response capacity. Even though you had a lot of customers enrolled, you only really needed to use like 10% of that. You wouldn't report that number. That would be the utilized number. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Would I need to add some additional, you think it would be helpful to add some additional explanation there?
I bring it up because we had some conversation in our UTC rules that talk about achievability and capability, and we went back and forth on what they were looking for, and so I just wanted to align that with what you have here, but I think it's fine as is.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah. I think we're good. Thank you, Aaron.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, sometimes there's some people who kind of think like think more deep into it, and then but if I add if I add too many words, I don't want to confuse them. All right. Any other thoughts? Okay. So last time we talked about unspecified contracts, and this was due to a new law that was passed. And this is only supposed to be required for consumer-owned utilities, so we added a note here. Report details on unspecified electricity contracts with terms greater than 31 days used to serve Washington retail customers during the prior interim performance period. We heard from you all that you're concerned about confidentiality, and so we removed the contract name, and we have number of contracts in this column. We got rid of the specific dates. We have months in year. An alternative format would probably be having a range like this. This might be preferable for kind of the bookend between each year. Might be easier to write. And then we have the duration in days. We have purpose category. So we have under purpose category resource adequacy, RAP compliance, business opportunity, or other. And we have a note section. I'd like feedback if folks are there other purpose categories that you would include here, or would you revise these categories? Any thoughts from utilities?
I guess I'm just curious in terms of the term business opportunity, is that intended to encompass, kind of regular physical and price hedging behavior, or what was sort of envisioned in terms of that category?
I'm not sure. I think it was just like a suggestion that was thrown out there. If there's a better category, or if you'd get rid of it, I'd be open to your thoughts. I think we just kind of threw together some examples, and we didn't think about it too thoroughly, as I think utilities have a better understanding of the reasons why they would purchase unspecified electricity contracts. If you think business opportunity fits under resource adequacy, or if there's a better name, I'm open to suggestions.
Yeah, it just to me feels a little vague. So, from PGP's perspective, at minimum, we are interested in capturing, the resource adequacy and RAP categories that you have already listed, but then also the physical and price hedging as a category, and perhaps even, you know, two different categories. You know, if you're hedging against limited physical, like hydro supply going into the summer, or if you're hedging against you know, MLK Day weekend, you know, price spike that you know, you can see enough into the future to um balance against that. Just wanting to one of the pieces of feedback we PTP heard as we were advancing 1329 was that, you know, there's a lack of public awareness of that, you know, necessary economic behavior responding to external, you know, price and supply signals. So I think having those disaggregated from general business opportunities would probably be beneficial. But I'm also happy to, you know, if anyone else who is actually a utility, if you disagree, open to hearing that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Do you think price hedging would take the place of business opportunities, or do you think you would still have business opportunities as a category?
Just for me, I don't know what business opportunity means. Price
Okay.
hedging is a little just more specific.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any other thoughts? All right. Do folks have any other thoughts on the general structure of this or any feedback? Okay, well, we'll move on then. This section is new, fossil, or non-emitting. So here we have, last time we talked about this column right here, what potential risks were identified with the acquisition of this resource. And Charlie suggested that we include some examples of potential risks. So here I listed some examples of potential risks include, but are not limited to financial risks, market volatility risks, reliability risk, and environmental risks. What do folks think about those examples? Would you add any, remove any, change any? Brian, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I was gonna, um, oh, so here we can list a number of different risks, and some of those risks could be the same across different resources, right? So would it be okay to list it once and sort of use the same thing across different resources, or
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, I don't think, yeah, this was not listed by like potential risks. It was listed by the resource that is new fossil or non-emitting.
Oh, yeah, yeah, gotcha. Okay, all right.
So yeah, it's not mutually exclusive, or it doesn't need to be listed by the risk type, but it's
Mhm.
kind of listed by each of the resources that aren't renewable or energy storage, basically.
Gotcha. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
I have a quick question of that last column. I'm just curious what, why that question is asked. Is that information that is required to be collected in the law, or is there another purpose behind this question?
This question is the resource
Yes.
located in highly impacted communities or vulnerable populations.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so originally we had some more extensive equity questions, and when I looked at the rule, I thought the scope was more limited. So I don't think this is technically required, but I think it follows the intent of CETA in that CETA basically asks this question for all of the renewable resources. Basically, like any actions you take towards CETA, they want to know if the resource is located in highly impacted communities or vulnerable populations and its impact. And they want to ensure that there's a
Oh, I think because it doesn't ask about the impact, whether or not it's located, physically located in a highly impacted community or vulnerable population, it's kind of a meaningless question because it could be a positive or a negative thing depending on the impact that it's having on the community. And so I don't know what value is going to come out of this question in and of itself without any additional context. I'm not opposed to it. I'm just cautioning that it might be, yeah, it's going to have limited value. I don't understand what value is going to come out of it without additional context. That's just a general comment.
Mm-hmm. Charlie, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I might be tying together actually Almaz's comment and then your question before about the, are we missing anything or is there anything we need to change about the list of some examples for risk? And because I was looking back at my notes from our last meeting, and I know I don't think Cameron is here on this call. Cameron from Front and Centered had attended last time and chatted with Aaron and I in advance of that meeting, and he had said he had mentioned. And I quote, cumulative risk of environmental burdens as a potential risk. And I was trying to think about, what that meant, cumulative risk of environmental burdens. And I think what he was getting at is risk to communities due to whatever the resource is. Risk to their health or, because of pollution or noise or things like that. I don't know if this type of risk is captured in this list of examples, like maybe it can fall under environmental. So maybe that's kind of a good way to put that train of thought into the minds of whoever's filling out this form, is to list risks like, I don't know, health or broadly risk to name communities. And that might tie into that last question that Almaz had pointed out, is like, how are we kind of tying this question about name communities into the rest of this? And if we're listing like risks to name communities, then it might illuminate that a little bit better.
I see that now. Yeah, we had these questions around what are the potential risks of this resource, and I guess the utility would be able to get at that context through these questions. And I thought it might be a little redundant to ask more questions, and it might go far beyond kind of the parameters of the rule to ask an extensive series of additional questions. But these could be used as areas where utilities could provide context about the potential risks, how they mitigate those risks, and if we know it's located in the highly impacted or vulnerable population, they could talk about how they have mitigated these risks from air pollution or potentially other sources of pollution like water pollution if it's a nuclear facility. Any other thoughts on this? Charlie, do you think the examples here are sufficient, or we're kind of got at your feedback that you had for this?
I like the ones that are listed. I like that it's not inclusive. Yeah, I don't know if it captures the thought. I'm not gonna take credit for the idea that Cameron had about like just risk to name communities, like I
Yeah.
said, health or cultural resources or things like that. But not everything has to be listed out too.
Yeah. All right, any other thoughts? Okay. I think this section is the same. It's mostly just listing the metrics and the quantitative values. Let's see here. This section, I think, remained largely unchanged. This is kind of the qualitative description that kind of pairs with this. So it talks about how the established indicators have changed for highly impacted communities in the past 4 years, if at all. How did it match or not match expectations? If progress has not been achieved, when is it expected to be achieved in the near future? And we repeat that question for vulnerable populations and then all other customers. So this is basically trying to get at the part that says, please provide an analysis of whether the forecasted distribution of benefits and reduction of burdens accrued or originally expected to accrue to highly impacted communities, vulnerable populations, and all other customers. And we just basically break it down for utilities. Any thoughts on these two tabs before I move on? All right, moving on. This part, we made some changes to the language. It was originally talking about discussing the impact of the specific action on each of the populations. So this was highly impacted communities, vulnerable populations, and all other customers. And then Steve pointed out that the language in the rule says more specifically along the lines of energy and non-energy benefits and reduction of burdens. So I wrote as discuss the energy and non-energy benefits and reduction of burdens for highly impacted communities, vulnerable populations, and then the reduction of burdens language is not as associated with all other customers in the statute or rule. So it changes to try and more directly align with the statute and the rule. But is the phrasing clear? Would you rather word this as a question, like what are the energy and non-energy benefits and reduction of burdens associated with this specific action? Is the phrasing clear? Do we need to explain energy, non-energy benefits in a note, or kind of provide some examples? Folks have thoughts here?
I have one thought, Amanda with Avista, on this and the previous tab too, just around the breakdown of highly impacted communities versus vulnerable populations. So we have been tracking our metrics through one lump sum. So what we're calling named communities, right? So we're combining the highly impacted and the vulnerable and then comparing that to the whole. And so I have to go back to my data team and see if we can break out the specific vulnerable and highly impacted into two separate categories.
For like the specific actions piece, or for the, I think Avista probably has it for sure separated by metrics.
Yeah, for our metrics. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So it'd be more so the question of the specific actions.
Yeah. So I just don't know how that plays a role and if I need to go back to my data team and see if we can separate those out.
Mhm. Okay. Mhm. Okay. Um, do folks have other thoughts on this? Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's a way um to combine the columns, or if that would, you know, you might have to look at the rule and see if we can just combine them as one column, or I could add a note that says if you don't have it disaggregated, you could just copy and paste the same response into both columns.
Okay, yeah, we can continue to talk about it too. I
Yeah,
can go back to my data team and see if it's possible for us to separate them out.
yeah. Yeah, there are very distinct kind of methodologies for each population, but I'm not sure if utilities kind of disaggregated in that way when they were recording their actions. Any other thoughts or comments on this?
Aaron, I don't see. Okay, the rule, I guess, could be either or am I reading that wrong? Or is it all, or it's and, sorry, it's and. So you need highly impacted vulnerable population and all other customers. Am I reading that correctly? That's right. Sorry to hear that. Can you all hear me?
Yeah,
Oh,
we can hear you.
oh, okay.
I think we're just looking through it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Aaron, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I was just reading
Oh,
everything out loud
I
and
saw
you
your
guys.
lips moving. No words.
Yeah, so I don't know how much you heard me, but this is basically saying your report to demonstrate whether or not how consistent with RCW, this RCW, that all customers are benefiting from the transition to clean energy. And then that RCW is talking about through the equitable that, the utility is ensuring that all customers are benefiting from the transition to clean energy through the equitable distribution of energy and non-energy benefits, reduction of burdens to vulnerable populations and highly impacted communities. I think it's not an or, so we would want to make sure that utilities are talking about both populations and not just one.
Well, that's where I'm not sure what we are going to do on our end because we are doing both lumped into one category
Yeah,
because there's so much overlap.
yeah, and if there's overlap, maybe you could kind of talk about how your utilities taking action in both of these populations and not just one. But just providing some, and I'm sure through your metrics you have some hard data as well. So you can kind of connect the dots that way, and you could at least ensure that um, that you're helping both populations. So I think technically, um, I think technically we could combine it, but it is safer to like keep it separate. And if utilities have that data, they can provide it that way. But I'm curious if there's other utilities that have programs in place that specifically target vulnerable populations versus highly impacted communities, or is it usually just you just kind of lump them together, but you at least make sure your metrics are separate? Do folks have thoughts? PSC, Brian, do you have thoughts? Do you guys have programs that are specific for vulnerable populations and programs that specifically target highly impacted communities separately?
that I'm thinking of a specific program could be something about income eligibility. That probably crosses both highly impacted and vulnerable populations. I recognize that the definitions can be distinct, but I think we cover both. Now, our metric, we do separate our metric. There's a high vulnerable population, and then there's a highly impacted community, and how we disaggregate some of our numbers. But from a programming standpoint, there's just overlaps there that it's sort of difficult to tease out which one's vulnerable, which one's highly impacted.
Okay. Sounds like there's some overlap. So it's kind of hard to tease it out. It looks like Garcia said that Seattle City Light's vulnerable population overlaps a lot with highly impacted community census tracts. And then Kimberly says that they lean on highly impacted communities for targeted program outreach, but agree with Brian. So Kimberly, do you have like kind of targeted program outreach for highly impacted communities and have kind of separate things for vulnerable populations?
It's hard to separate the two as Brian and others expressed, but I think it's easier to draw those lines when it comes to highly impacted communities. For the outreach portion of some of our programs, it's easier, right, to target those specific areas than say of a group more specifically that could be dispersed in different ways, if that makes sense. It tends to be on the sort of outreach side of things, but I could see folks, other individuals, and or utilities targeting both through their programs.
Oh, sorry, I'm muted. There's overlap in the populations, and it sounds like there might be overlap in some of the factors that you look at as well. Um, okay. Any other thoughts? Oh, Charlie?
Yeah, thanks. So highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations, as we know, together make up the definition of named communities in Washington, right? Um, I wonder if it could be okay if utilities who have defined each of these groups, like we've looked at and we know what our HICs are, because that's very, Department of Health map. We've looked at and worked with, a subset of our customers to define vulnerable populations, and we know kind of like their mapping or however we've done it as well. For utilities who have done that, I wonder if it's okay to show that data for named communities overall, knowing that they have distinguished between these two groups. I think my concern about lumping the two together and just kind of saying like copy and paste or like just talk about your named communities comes up if there is a case in which a utility hasn't looked at defining or identifying vulnerable populations. So then they'd pretty much just be relying on the highly impacted community portion and saying that applies to VPs without, but making an effort to see if there even is that overlap, which sounds like there is, but I think that's kind of come up a lot in the first round of CEIPs is like looking at some data and then having to be like, that's just HICs, what about VPs? And then now we're at least, PSE, Vista, and others have done work to look at vulnerable populations too. So maybe there's kind of something there that kind of makes the difference between whether or not we're distinguishing the two.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. There could be overlap, but there might be utilities that have very different factors that they're looking at, or they might not be looking at vulnerable populations at all, and that would be good to know. In the CEIP reporting template for consumer-owned utilities, we had we kind of walked consumer-owned utilities through looking at the factors in the highly impacted community kind of health disparities map and looking at the results for those factors and thinking about the types of specific actions that they could take to reduce these issues in their service territory. So if there are areas that have like language accessibility is a huge highly impact is kind of one of the major factors in their environmental health disparities map. They could think about actions to take towards that, or if there's a high poverty rate or low education rate, they could think about workforce development. So that was really catering utilities towards thinking about how they could take actions and look at the factors that are affecting these populations and really cater towards these issues and address them. And I'm not sure if they're looking at the vulnerable population factors the same way, but I think we would kind of want maybe this time around in this template, they might not have that thought process down, but the next go around, they might have that level of detail where they're talking about the distinctions between these populations and being able to have targeted outreach to address some of these issues. Amanda had a question. Charlie, can you clarify if you're proposing that we include this overlap analysis in our CEIP or this reporting template?
Yeah, I'm thinking one option, and I don't know if I love this idea, it's just an idea, is to have the utilities who have identified vulnerable populations and highly impacted communities separately if it's easier for them, because it sounds like Avista, or Amanda, you're saying that Avista is tracking a bunch of data for named communities together, but it hasn't separated it out. But I know that Avista has done work to identify vulnerable populations and has like a whole different definition than HICs, even though there is overlap. For those utilities who have done that, I wonder if it's easier to just track named communities, because we know that your definition of named communities is robust.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense. I appreciate that. Thank you for clarifying.
Mm-hmm. But I guess it doesn't really help if utilities haven't done that. That doesn't really help them. It still makes this kind of a more difficult reporting thing, which maybe it's just kind of highlighting, oh, there's work to do in identifying vulnerable populations.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm open to suggestions if folks have thoughts
Could
on
we
this.
have a third column that says basically the same thing, but instead of listing them out separately for highly impacted and vulnerable, just have one for named communities for those that do have combined data sets?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll put that suggestion down. Yep. Garcia says she likes that suggestion. Yeah, at least for this iteration. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Another alternative is we could just combine them into one, and if utilities, at least for this go around, combine it into one, and if utilities are able to distinguish between the two, we could. That's another potential. Or we could kind of add a note there. If you're able to distinguish between the two, please do. Okay, sounds good. Any other thoughts on this tab? All right. Well, the incremental costs tab is the same. So that's it for our review of the revised reporting template. Any final thoughts on this or questions?
All right. I must have missed this. I had to step away for a few minutes. But was there any comments around like the metrics in the indicators tab that I followed that fall into the forecast tab? My main concern. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, there's a little bit of connection issues, but I think your question was, is there a connection between the indicators in the forecast tab? Are there metrics that follow over? And in this template, we don't have that kind of like direct kind of feature where we had in the consumer owned utility clean energy implementation plan. The reason why is kind of a technical thing. So basically, the way the data is organized, the way the data is organized is hard to directly transfer in a neat way because we're asking people to provide two values for like the 2021 baseline value and the 2025 year end value. And we could, for instance, like try and just like copy the indicators from the previous tab, like just go like that and then just copy it down. But it's not going to be to the same extent of the whole like data model thing that was going on in the previous in the consumer and utility clean energy implementation plan. Is kind of like a just a technical thing because we have multiple metrics and then we're kind of having an additional level of detail for each metric. We're having 2 years of different data points. So, but people are able to reference between the tabs. Hopefully, I was thinking about potentially adding these at the end here, but again, it's kind of like these questions are at the indicator level. And then these questions are at the most granular level is the metric level. So then you would end up with a lot of repeat rows that are unnecessary, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a technical reason. Yeah. Do you still have your hand up? Does that make sense, Christia?
Yeah, but sorry, it's me. I'm hoping you can hear me better, a little bit better now. Because it was more so like around the metrics, and I think I might have raised this last. I can't remember if I raised last time or if we didn't get to it last time. Mostly concern on our end because we don't like there's no metrics tab on our 2022 CIP. It just says source, and so I'm assuming that's what it references. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so the old CEIP template, I believe it asked about, I'd have to pull it up, but yeah, it did ask for data sources. And I think it was it indicators and data sources? So
yeah, it just says indicator, details, source, and date last updated.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I just wanted to confirm that the metric is equivalent to source in this instance.
Yeah. Yeah, and we could, yeah, it's so if I think in the previous template, wonder if I can pull it up. Let's see. Just give me 1 second. Yeah, it looks like we didn't list metrics. Let me see if I can share my screen. See what I'm seeing. So it looks like back then, in the old template, we had category, indicator, details, source, And here we didn't, back then we didn't provide a strong delineation between indicators and metrics. And so here the number of outages is basically a metric, and so so this would be basically the metric. I'm wondering if I need to, I added a note here, please specify unit of measurement. I'm wondering if this is, if I'm kind of assuming that all the consumer-owned utilities read the guidance that came with their new CEIP template and understand kind of where I'm getting at. But I could create, I think what I could do, and maybe I should do this for the investor-owned utilities because they haven't been as involved or seen the guidance, is I could provide that guidance document, and that kind of explains the indicators and metrics. What are folks' thoughts on that? Or maybe I could just even add a short blurb here that clarifies the definitions. Maybe I should. I'm leaning towards just adding a comment to explain the indicator here, because I don't want to like overwhelm people.
I think the comment might be would work because like I can assume what we could put in there, but I just have a feeling like some of my colleagues like would want to be explicitly told what it is that we're asked, or like that is being sought after, versus just like, you know, assuming like, okay, this is, you know, we have an indicator of public outreach, and in the details it does say, hey, this is what we're like, this is what we mean. So I think we can assume, but like the indicator would, like if you had a comment in there that explicitly said it, I think would put some of my colleagues at ease, just to 100% sure what we're putting in there is what Commerce is seeking.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll add a note here to add an explanation talking about where they should look at their previous CIP reporting template for these metrics. So I would probably add something like look at your indicators, and if it's if it has units of measurement, it's probably metric. And then I'll probably add an explanation of what we mean by indicators in this kind of this new clarification of how we've described it in the new guidance. I'll add a definition here, so just add a comment. Indicator units. Okay. Sounds good. Are there any other thoughts?
Hey, Aaron, real quick, could you go back to that forecast tab?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, in the new template. Is this the old one?
This is the performance and compliance template. Are you asking about the old one?
Yeah, the spreadsheet we were looking at earlier.
Yeah. So this is the old consumer-owned utility reporting template that was made a few years ago, and it kind of just said, please report the forecasted distribution of energy and non-energy benefits. And
Then
it kind of talks about specific actions and indicator.
okay.
Yeah, so in the new consumer and utility guidance, we kind of gave a more clear strategic planning approach for clean energy implementation planning, where the indicator is kind of like a key performance indicator, or when you describe kind of a strategic plan, it's what is linked to your goals. And so how we have in the new template is very different than kind of this approach. In the new approach, it's like the hierarchy is like, what's your goal or outcome? What are the indicators of you achieving that outcome? What are the kind of outcome metrics that you would measure to know that you've achieved those indicators of success? And then we have specific actions kind of underneath that. What are the specific actions you're going to take to meet your indicators of success? And another metric kind of thing that we have is, what are the input and output metrics that you're measuring in connection to your specific actions? For instance, if you have a demand response program, how many customers have you enrolled in your demand response program? Is an indicator, or sorry, is a metric that talks about kind of like the outputs from your specific action or program. So yeah, this old template does not follow that kind of strategic planning line of thinking, and it is a little hard to delineate, kind of talking about forecasted distribution of benefits, and then it goes straight into specific actions indicator. I guess the detail is kind of close to detail is kind of just the broad column here, I guess, that asks people to describe the impact. But I don't think investor-owned utilities use the CEIP template.
We get our information from the rules and everything, so
Yeah.
But it's good to kind of get a glimpse here. So thanks for that, Aaron.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the new consumer-owned utility template is kind of easier to understand the logic and the flow of how everything connects. Have you been able to take a look at that? Yeah.
I have not yet. No.
Yeah. So the new template is very different, and I'm not sure. I can share it with you, and if you're interested, I'm not sure how deep I want to go if investor-owned utilities don't want to, go into the details at that level when they don't have to. But let me share it with the investor-owned utilities, and kind of I'll ask what your guys' thoughts are on the guidance document, the COU reporting template, and just get your thoughts on, like, how much information do you think you need, like, because at the end of the day, you guys have your own thing at the UTC too. And yeah.
Okay. Can you go back to that spreadsheet we were looking at when we first started?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Is the purple column CDE, sorry, C and D? I guess there's a option if it's both, if the indicator matches the expectations for highly impacted communities and vulnerable people, you can select both. And then for description in the orange, you could select both. I'm reflecting on the conversation we had earlier about, is it highly impacted and vulnerable? Is it both? Is there overlap? But
I think for metrics, at least for the investor-owned utilities, you guys did oh, I think you guys separated it, but you guys might have also done generally just named communities for your metrics.
yep, I think it's a bit of an overlap. So Puget has them separated. But I know earlier we were talking with, I think Avista had to leave, but there may be some overlaps there. But I was just thinking through how we made that change in that other section. Is that also applicable to this forecast section?
Yeah, here we talked about just combining them or creating a third column.
Right.
I guess here it's qualitative and it's just yes or no.
Okay.
Let's see. I guess here it is asking how have the indicators and metrics changed.
Right.
Past 4 years, did it match expectations? If progress has not been achieved? Yeah. I think I'm more hesitant to combine them for this section because I think you guys would technically have the data disaggregated. Charlie, you might know better because you're more involved with all the investor-owned utilities and their metrics. Do you recall if they were typically separated?
I thought so, and I'm looking at the CPIs and PSC CEIP right now, and a lot of them, and the metrics, and a lot of them will say like, what's a good example? Increased number and percentage of participation in a list of programs within highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations, and it does that a lot for Metro HICs and VPs. So I mean, I think PSC has had several presentations where they'll show the data for like these different metrics, and I'm forgetting right now without seeing those presentations. And Brian, you might know if it is disaggregated, but I feel either it is or it's something NWEC has commented on before, saying like, oh, it should be. So we're making sure we're covering vulnerable populations particularly.
That's
Sí,
right.
gracias.
So yeah. Oh, sorry about that. So yeah, I would agree. Okay, I see what you're saying, Aaron. Like this is the metric, and so the metric is probably separated versus the specific action in the other tab we were talking about earlier may not be. It may be both or it may not be separated. I just want to delineate between the two. Okay.
Yeah, because they are very distinct populations, and I'm guessing the utility would collect data on the populations separately if there is overlap. I guess they would have some similar metrics, but for specific actions, I could see utilities just being like, okay, well, for both highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations, we're going to take these actions for all of them, and we're not going to do different actions for the different populations. So I could see that. Charlie, did you have anything you wanted to add? Okay.
No, thanks.
Thanks, Charlie.
Any other thoughts on this? All right. I'll close out then, talk about next steps. All right. You guys see the PowerPoint slide? All right, awesome. All right, well, I'm just gonna close out and thank you guys for investing your time into this advisory group, for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Thank you to those who served in the CEIP advisory group as well and have been with me over the course of the year. It's been a full year now. For those that also served on the CEIP advisory group, your feedback resulted in many improvements and new guidance materials for utilities, which will hopefully result in utilities feeling empowered, excited, and more engaged with their communities in the clean energy transition. In terms of next steps, over the next few weeks, we'll host a public meeting. So we'll get that scheduled and we'll share it on the CETA bulletin. So if you're not subscribed to that CETA bulletin, you can sign up on our website, the Commerce website, energy website, and sign up for the CETA bulletin, where we'll get public comment on this revised reporting template, and we'll present the information on this template and receive public comments, and then from there we'll finalize the materials for this interim performance and reporting template. That I will stop recording. Let's see if I can do that, because I